Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're doing another top 10 video, which is fun. I'm sorry if it seems like I'm kind of spamming this channel with top 10s because honestly there's not a whole else I can think of doing. I would do more of the talky sort of videos, but I don't think of topics for that often, and this is a lot easier to think of. And all of that, and I am still working on trying to get my recording software all running properly. But I decided I'd do this because it was suggested, so I figured I'd make a video about it. So today we're going to be doing a top 10 things that I want to see in a Star Wars RPG if one were to be made. And this video was suggested by a viewer named Mudcrab Menace, so thank you Mudcrab Menace for suggesting this video. So without further ado, let's just get into the list, although I do have a couple of honorable mentions. First one is kind of obvious if you sort of know what I like, and that is a Knights of the Old Republic 3. Because I would really like to see one, but this list is just based on the assumption that this game would not be connected to any other Star Wars games or anything like that. Second thing is an open world, which, I don't know, I want an open world RPG. I mean, that is like my dream Star Wars game, basically, like Skyrim, but Star Wars. That would be like my kind of thing. But I honestly would be fine with just a regular RPG that doesn't really have an open world. I do still want some exploration in it, similar to what was in Knights of the Old Republic or something like the Mass Effect games, meaning the original trilogy, not Andromeda, because I know that is actually apparently open world. I haven't played it. But something like those I would be fine with, but I would still like to have an actual open world. Just something like that, something like Knights of the Old Republic or Mass Effect I would be fine with. So, I don't know. It's just something that I think would be cool to have, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. However, this third honorable mention is something that I do really want from a Star Wars RPG, and really any Star Wars game to come out that is going to be story focused. And that is no story-related DLC. And the reason for this is I'm fine with, like, if it has a multiplayer mode, if there was some multiplayer items that were DLC, like armors or weapons or whatever, but I would not be okay if they just said, here's some cool story stuff, but you have to pay extra for it. I think that's kind of stupid. As far as like RPGs that are very story focused goes, which is what I'm assuming this game would be, it's just not something that I feel like really works. And the reason why it's an honorable mention rather than actually in the list, because it is something that I really want, is because I honestly, with EA and everything, I don't think they would allow that. But if it worked out, I would be completely on board with free story DLC, because they apparently are doing free DLC for Battlefront 2. No story DLC, please. That's what I would like for my story games. So that's pretty much all the honorable mentions, so we can get into the actual top 10 now. So the first one at number 10 is for it to take place within, sort of in between episodes 3 and episodes 4. That's a time period that I don't really think, as far as in movies and games are concerned, because it has been in books. It hasn't really been explored a whole lot. We have had a couple of times like Rogue One, but that is like very close to A New Hope. So I would like to see something that is like in between that time, or at least something set around the time period of the original trilogy, where there's the conflict between the Empire and the Rebels. And I think that would be cool, and I think that would also give you the opportunity to join one of those two groups, or to stay out of it completely, similar to the Civil War in Skyrim, where you can join the Imperials or the Stormcloaks, or you can just not be a part of the war. And I would like to see something similar from this. I think that having it take place during that time period would work well for that, and it could be cool. Plus, we haven't seen a whole lot from that. And there are other time periods that would be cool to see, like maybe a little before Episode 1 or during the Clone Wars or something. But personally, I just would rather have something during the time of the Empire, so that's number 10. Next one is a variety of locations. Now, I don't necessarily mean a variety of planets, although I would really like that. But if it took place on, say, one planet, then I would want there to be some variety in there, you know? I wouldn't want it to be just the same thing everywhere. And I know that it might not completely fit with some planets, like Tatooine, for example, is just desert everywhere. I think they could still throw some variety, like having some canyons or some maybe slightly more fertile areas or something. Just to make things a little more interesting, throw in some small villages or some cities or whatever. And I think that would be cool. And I would like to see a variety of planets if they could do that. But I'm not expecting that, even though I would like to see it. But if they could do several planets, I would like a variety. So like, I wouldn't want 5 jungle planets or something. Maybe like Endor, Tatooine, I don't know, like a water planet like Manon or Mon Calamari. Just some variety as far as the locations go would be very nice to have. So that's number 9. Next at number 8, we have innovative mechanics. Now, I'm not really sure exactly what this could include, but it's still something I want to see. I want them to try something different and new and exciting. And I think that a RPG would be a pretty good place for that. I'm not sure exactly what they could do, but I would still like to see a couple of things thrown in there that make things a little more interesting, just so it's not like a generic space RPG or something like that. So, innovative mechanics is number 8. So 7 is something that isn't super important to me, but it is still something that I would want, and that is good, fun combat. As much as I love Knights of the Old Republic, the combat really, for me personally, isn't anything too spectacular. It's not terrible, but it's kind of hard to get involved in and really like get into. I would like to see something similar to the combat of like the Mass Effect games that is more focused on like gunplay and everything rather than a turn-based like combat system. However, I would want it to be a little bit more enjoyable than like say the combat from the Elder Scrolls games, which isn't terrible, but it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Although the combat isn't the main focus of the game, so I wouldn't expect it to be great. But I would still like to have something that is enjoyable to play. So, fun combat gets number 7. Number 6 is kind of an obvious one, where it's an RPG, and that is to have a good storyline. There are a couple of reasons why I would consider RPGs to be probably my favorite kind of video game. And one of those is the stories that they can tell and how involved you can get in them and the choices you can make and all that. We'll be getting to choices a little later, but the storyline is still something very important and something that I think should have a lot of focus put into it. For example, the story in Knights of the Old Republic is really good, and that's one of the biggest draws to the game for me. Same thing with Mass Effect. Although the gameplay is also enjoyable, the story is also really good. But I would like to see a really interesting storyline. Something that isn't just kind of made just to have a storyline. I want some effort put into it, and for it to be actually really enjoyable. And then number 5 kind of sort of comes from that a little bit, sort of. It's good characters, because an RPG for me, as far as like the storyline sort of thing goes, not really the storyline, I don't really know how to explain it, but the 2 of the core parts of RPGs for me are the characters and the story. Like I've said before, Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect have both good stories and good characters. And I think that does a really good job of building the universe, making you a little more involved. And so I think that's something that it would really need, and something that I would like to see. I know I'm not really going super in-depth with the story and the characters, but I think it kind of speaks for itself, because if you've played stuff like Mass Effect or Knights of the Old Republic, you pretty much know what I'm looking for. So, sorry I'm not really going as in-depth with this as I am with some of the other points, but it's just kind of self-explanatory. Next, at 4, we've got in-depth side quests. This is something, since it's an RPG, that again would be very important to have, because as good as the main storyline would be, side quests should also be an important part of the game, because side quests are a very integral part of a lot of RPGs. In some cases, in some games, I've even found myself getting more involved in a side quest than I would in the main quest. While I don't think that's something that should necessarily happen with this game, because I do want the storyline to be interesting, I do think that the side quest should at least be almost as interesting, at least like the main side quests, but like fetch quests or whatever, if those are in there. Don't really need a big story to them, but more important side quests, I think, should have some more stuff put into them and be a little more interesting and intricate. And having good side quests also helps build the world, and it's just something that I think is pretty important for an RPG to have, so it gets number 4. Third place goes to a detailed world. Now, by this I don't necessarily mean detailed as in the way everything looks, although of course that is something you'd want. But what I mean by that is more of the feeling that you get from playing the game and the feel that the world gives you and how well it's built around you. And that's something that I think is very important for really almost any kind of game, but even more so in RPGs, because it is basically you playing through a story in this world and potentially, making choices and all of that sort of thing. And it's important to be invested in the world that you're playing in. And I think adding some life and detail and all that sort of thing to the world is a very good thing to have, and something that I think a Star Wars RPG, or really any RPG, would benefit from. And I know that the world has kind of been built through other movies and games and all that, but I still think that you should be able to go into a game, even like a Star Wars game, and be able to know enough about the world that even if you've never seen Star Wars before, you can still get into the game. So that's number 3. Number 2 is something that for me is one of the most important aspects of RPGs, since you are being, in many cases, your own character that you create. Although in some cases, like Mass Effect or The Witcher or whatever, you are playing as an already established character. But in this case, I would like to have character creation and also character customization. Character creation is kind of an obvious one if it's an RPG for me, because while I don't dislike games that have you play as a character that's already been created, I do like to have the ability to create my own character. And of course, if you create your own character, you'd want to make it seem more like your own, so that's where the customization comes in, with like the way the character looks, or maybe even sounds or something like that. And have different clothing options, armor options, weapons, change the way their face looks, all that sort of thing is pretty important to me for games, and adds a lot to the immersion that I get from it. Because when I play an RPG that gives you this option, I like to get the feeling that I am my own character living in this world. While having a character that's already been created doesn't take away from that completely, it still, for me, is better to have my own character that is my own, and be able to live in this universe as that character. So then number 1 is something that I hinted at a little earlier, and kind of comes in from the character creation, where I mentioned actually living in the world, and that would be choice and different outcomes depending on the choices you make. This is something that is present in a lot of RPGs, but the ones that come to my mind the most is like Knights of the Old Republic, of course, and Mass Effect. These things are probably the most important thing, for me at least, in an RPG, is the ability to make your own choices and alter the storyline, so that if you played through it like 2 or 3 times, things might go a little bit differently each time, and it adds a lot of replayability to it, but also more immersion, because you can, make your own choices that can affect the entire rest of the game. And this is something that I think games like the Mass Effect trilogy does really well. If you make a certain choice in the first game, and you carry over your character from the first game into the second game and then into the third game, which, by the way, if this ends up being a series, that would be a cool feature to have. If you make a choice in the first game or the second game, it still affects the third game. And I think that that would be a good thing for a Star Wars RPG, or even if it ended up being like 2 or 3 games, would be a good feature to have. But even if it's one game, if you make a choice, it should be reflected throughout the rest of the game. If you make choices in a game, it should have consequences. If you make a bad choice in a game that is not everybody around your character is going to like, there should be consequences for the actions, just like there are in real life. In this case, you may have to limit it a little bit, unless you make it non-canon or something, which would honestly, it would make some sense in certain cases, but overall I think that this game should be canon just because of the storyline, and that just kind of makes the storyline feel like it matters a little bit more. So I think you should be able to make choices that can affect the storyline of the game, but just not like the storyline of Star Wars as a whole that could kind of break the canon. So that's probably the biggest thing that I want to see, is choices and consequences for your choices and different outcomes based upon the choices that you make and all of that. And that pretty much wraps up this video. So in the comments below, tell me what you thought of this topic, and if you agreed with any of my choices, if you disagreed with them, if there's anything that you think I might have missed, anything that you would like to see that I did not actually mention, then go ahead and leave those in the comments, and also leave any suggestions for future videos in the comments, because I'm always looking for new ideas for stuff to do, and I think that would really help, and I would like to hear your guys' input. So that pretty much finishes this video, so I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you always.